Hello everyone and a warm welcome to today's session, 5 key elements of cybersecurity framework and how organizations can best implement them. I am Shilpa Goswami and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or our speaker, please use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio-video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. Now about our speaker, Sentil Velaytham. He is an esteemed technical strategist celebrated for his adeptness in resolving business challenges and enhancing IT frameworks. Throughout his career, Sentil has effectively supported numerous clients in attaining their objectives. He has cultivated strong collaborations with distinguished technology partners like Drua, AWS, Commvault, EMC, NetApp, Cisco, VMware, Microsoft, Juniper Networks, Extreme Networks, HP, Nutanix, and others. Acknowledged as a true advocate for cloud technology and software as a service (SaaS), he staunchly advocates for streamlining technical operations to optimize productivity. Leveraging his profound understanding of these technologies, he addresses complex integration hurdles with refined, efficient, and cost-effective approaches. Driven by a fervent commitment to innovation, Sentil consistently prioritizes team success, establishing himself as a key person or influence in both the technological and business spheres. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Sentil.
Thank you, Shilpa, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Sentil Velaytham here. I want to thank you all for taking the time to attend the webinar here today. It's great to be able to present to such a huge crowd, and I'm humbled that you have taken some time out of your busy schedule for the webinar here today. Security is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and today I'll be talking about the key elements in the cybersecurity framework and how you as a stakeholder in your organizations can best implement them. There was a bit of an update from when we started and finalized the topic for the webinar. NIST Framework has updated the cybersecurity framework and have added a 6th element to the framework. We will review that framework as well in the following slides. Please ask as many questions as you want. I will endeavor to have them answered on the session. Alternatively, there's an option where you can post the answer or questions on Reddit, and then I'll be able to answer them as well. I'm here to learn, and so it'll be great to share any insights from you guys as well. So feel free to comment as well. With that said, let's get started. In 2014, the US government established the National Institute of Standards and Technology, called NIST Cybersecurity Framework, aimed at providing recommended standards for enhancing cybersecurity of organizations across public and private sectors. They came up with 5 distinct frameworks that complement each other. It's protect, detect, respond, recover, identify. In 2017, as part of the Cybersecurity Executive Order, the framework was converted into the federal government policy in the US. This framework has gone through a number of iterations over the years. The original version, which is version 1.0, and the second update, version 1.1, which was used till 2023. Some key changes between version 1 and version 1.1 was the guidance on how to perform self-assessment, guidance on how to interact with the supply chain stakeholders, additional details in supply chain risk management, and perhaps one of the ones that's always viewed with a pinch of salt by organization, encouraging organizations to implement a vulnerability disclosure policy. On the 26th of February, 2024, NIST released an updated draft of the framework to enhance its effectiveness and enforceability for government agencies, industries, and other organizations. This updated cybersecurity framework added the govern function to the framework. Now, what is the purpose of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? Why does it exist? The NIST Cybersecurity Framework aids organizations in mitigating cybersecurity risks. As IT stakeholders in your organization and in your discussions with your colleagues from the other end of the industry, you would come across the realization that each business, each organization faces unique risk that requires a customized implementation of the cybersecurity framework. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework is there to enhance the understanding and assessment of cybersecurity threats. The framework assists organizations in prioritizing risk management improvements and establishing a common framework for discussing cybersecurity issues, capabilities, expectations, and needs. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework was originally intended for companies involved in federal government supply chains, such as prime contractors and subcontractors, through the standards that are relevant to across all businesses. For organizations without a cybersecurity strategy, the framework provides an excellent starting point. This is very relevant to the small and medium enterprises out there. The 2023 Cybersecurity Summary Report states that around 60% of the respondents to the study responded that they can't afford cybersecurity services, or they rely on a low-cost, free or open source software for cybersecurity. As such, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a great starting point for the IT personnel in these organizations specifically. For businesses with an existing cybersecurity program, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework can reinforce risk management efforts. Many managed services cybersecurity providers utilize the framework to assess a business's current position and determine the necessary adjustment that is required in their strategy to move forward. Govern is the latest framework that has been included in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. This forms the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. The purpose of the govern function is to ensure that the organization's cybersecurity risks management strategy, expectation, and policy are not only established, but also effectively communicated and continually monitored. The govern function plays a pivotal role by providing outcomes that guide the organization in achieving and prioritizing objectives across all the other 5 functions. These are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recovery, by aligning them with the organization's mission and stakeholder expectations. Governance activities within the govern function are essential for seamlessly integrating cybersecurity into the broader framework of enterprise risk management. In essence, the govern function serves as a cornerstone for ensuring that cybersecurity measures are not only aligned with organizational objectives, but also adequately integrated into the overall risk management framework, thereby enhancing the organization's resilience against cyber threats. Simply put, govern guides an organization how they can make an educated decision regarding their cybersecurity strategy. The govern function encompasses several key aspects, including understanding the organizational context, formulating cybersecurity strategy, managing cybersecurity supply chain risks, defining roles, responsibilities, and authorities, establishing policies, and overseeing the execution of cybersecurity strategies. Essentially, it sort of forms a governance across the remaining 5 frameworks. An example of the govern function in the telecommunication industry would be the following. The top-level executives in the organizations discuss and agree on how a cybersecurity-related issue might affect the achievement of the organization's objectives. These objectives could be to ensure that they provide continued service, as in some countries, telecommunication are listed under critical services, especially true if they're supplying to core government organizations. It could also be about ensuring customer confidentiality. Based on these objectives, the top-level executives will agree on roles, responsibilities, policies, and oversight. They will then communicate the expectation about risk appetite, accountability, and resources back to the executive sponsors and subsequently to the managers in each department. The respective managers will then enforce the cybersecurity policies within the respective department to ensure adherence. They will also rely on a mechanism to report back up to the chain on the effectiveness of these strategies in terms of implementation. Top-level executives will continuously review and revise the process by adjusting cybersecurity risk management strategy and performance based on the reported outcomes. This process also includes the task of identifying, managing, and monitoring the risks associated with external suppliers and any third-party relationship that the organization might have. The identify function of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework involves recognizing critical assets within the organization and comprehending their associated risks, also known as NIST asset management. The primary tasks conducted during this phase include cataloging physical and software assets within the organization to lay the groundwork for an asset management program. This program enables the organization to ascertain which assets are critical to subsequent elements in the IT security framework. Evaluating the business environment supported by the organization and aligning how its offerings relate to the standards necessary for the organizations that is participating in securing critical business assets within the supply chain. For example, a medical center will have processes and tools that are in place to ensure how and when patients' data will be shared with external third-party organizations. This could be a pathology department or a radiology department, and etc. Assessing cybersecurity policies established within an organization to outline the governance program and determine alignment with the organization's legal and regulatory obligation regarding cybersecurity. It also serves as a foundation for the organization's risk assessment strategy by identifying vulnerabilities and threats to internal and external resources, as well as establishing risk tolerances for specified threat models. It also helps in developing a supply chain risk management strategy, encompassing priorities, constraints, risk tolerances, and assumptions utilized to facilitate risk decision associated with supply chain risk management. What are the best practices an organizations can employ for the identify phase? Investing in a centralized tool that will be able to query the assets that are connected to the network of the organization. In the ITIL framework, this task is identified as having a robust service asset and configuration management tool. This tool should be a centralized tool that would allow the administrators to obtain details of the device, such as the network details, current version of the software, configuration dump, login access, and etc. It should also be a central repository where it stores the as-built documentation, design revision, escalation context, and additional information about the equipment or the asset. Often, when we speak about assets, we tend to assume infrastructure. However, the term asset is a little bit loose in the framework, and its relativeness changes depending on the organization. For some organization, it could be documentation, policies, compliance documents, and in some cases, it could be even an external product that's supplied by an external entity. The objective of the framework is to identify the asset, assess the risks associated to the asset that is compromised, identify the exposure of the asset in relation to the other assets in the organization. Now, this looks at if asset A is impacted, what impact does it have to asset B, C, D, and so on and so forth. Finally, to build a triage documentation in the event that the asset is compromised and establish a risk tolerance policy for the asset that's been impacted. Now, how would this tool help? Service and asset management configuration system would allow the organization to perform a complete audit of the critical assets in the organization. The audit will, in the process of ensuring documentation compliance, patch and firmware revisions of the assets. It also validates the contact details as part of the escalation process should there be a cybersecurity event that's detected for the asset. According to the annual cyber threat report 2022-2023 that's developed by the Australian Signals Directorate, 1 in 5 critical vulnerabilities were exploited within 48 hours. This is despite the organization that is being surveyed does have some form of mechanism of patching and also data mitigation advice that's available to them. So having a centralized asset management tool is going to be critical in allowing us to do the audit. The protect function. The protect function is a critical component of the cybersecurity framework. It focuses on developing and implementing safeguards to ensure the delivery of critical infrastructure services and limit the potential impact of cybersecurity events. This function encompasses the various outcome categories such as identity management, access control, awareness and training, data security, perimeter security, application security, information protection process, maintenance, and protective technology. Unlike the identity function, which primarily focuses on the baselining of establishment and monitoring, Protect takes a more proactive approach, incorporating practices like two-factor authentication and employee training to mitigate risks of breaches, particularly in light of the increasing cybersecurity threats. The Protect function serves as a guide outlining essential outcomes that are necessary for reducing breach risks and enhancing the overall cybersecurity posture. In line with the proactive nature of the framework, organizations should implement the following best practices for this framework. Establishing safeguards for identity management and access control to minimize the exposure of sensitive information within the organization, thereby containing the impact of a potential cybersecurity incident. Perimeter security, network security, and application security tool will help here. Developing awareness and training programs to empower organizational staff, highlighting distinctions between privileged and non-privileged users, and empowering them to make informed decisions. According to the Global Cybersecurity Association, in their report that was published in 2023, The Importance of Cybersecurity Awareness Training and Its Impact, they've identified the following. The cybersecurity awareness training helps to build a human shield by empowering the employees to identify and mitigate potential risks. Employees are more empowered to report a potential threat that they see instead of just brushing it off as a one-off incident. It also helps to promote a positive security behavior within the organizational staff. Employees will understand the importance of unique and strong passwords. They'll also understand the importance of keeping the password secure. Apprehensions about connecting the office laptop or mobile devices to an unknown network, for example, and also building a safe browsing habit whenever they're using the office equipment. It also helps to reduce insider threats. If you know, insider threats is one of the key flaws within an organization where they fail to protect that, and that's how most of the incidents propagate within the organization. By doing training, employees will be generally more cautious in sharing sensitive data internally and externally, sharing credentials and also unwanted behaviors that will impact organization security, such as opening doors for external visitors without an access card, and etc. Safeguarding the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information by implementing data security measures aligned with the organization's risk strategy, potentially informed by the NIST impact levels. The levels are expressed in the value of low, moderate, and high. How can organizations do this? Data classification. Classifying data based on its sensitivity level allows the organization to apply appropriate security controls and protection measures. Security admins need not to go far. There is this one inbuilt functionality in Microsoft 365 I do believe that customers need to purchase an additional uplift on the license, but these are examples of using inbuilt tool within a specified product. So you don't need to go far and invest in an external tool to get this implemented. You can already use the existing security functionality within the tools that you use day in, day out. The fourth aspect of it is to implement an information protection processes and procedures to uphold the security of information systems and its assets, such as multi-factor authentication, complex password policy, encryption, password grandfathering, and password rotation policies. The fifth function, which is detect, the fourth actually, detect function of the cybersecurity framework involves establishing and executing activities to promptly identify cybersecurity incidents as they occur. This involves installing a monitoring and detection systems that is capable of alerting organizations to potential threats and enabling swift responses. The procedures established during this phase determine the level of proactive threat detection within an organization. Apart from that, the ability of an organization to revisit the logs of the tool is important for forensic analysis and help in building the required strategy for prevention. Essentially, the detect function facilitates the timely identification of cybersecurity incidents. The key outcome categories within this function include anomalies and events, security continuous monitoring, and the detection process. Here are some of the strategies of best practices within the detect framework. First, the anomalies and events. Ensure that your team is equipped to gather and analyze data from various sources to detect cybersecurity incidents. As an example, a good tool would be one that is able to correlate the change rate within the data and also the entropy rate of the data. An entropy rate is the measure of average randomness in a sequence of data. This tool would measure the data in the ratio of 1/comparison ratio, i.e., the average amount of information contained in each of the sequence. The entropy rate is between 0 to 1. The higher or the closer it is to the number 1, the more higher the entropy rate is, and the more risk of the data being encrypted. For example, if you've been backing up a particular snapshot that is going through a steady change, it would have a steady change rate and a steady entropy rate due to the incremental cycle of the backup. However, if there's a sudden spike in the change rate or in combination of the entropy rate, there's a very high chance that the data could be encrypted because it's seeing a whole bunch of new data when the backup process is executed again. Continuous security monitoring. Implement continuous monitoring of your assets around the clock and consider engaging a managed security services provider for additional support. Using a managed security services provider is a very good strategy for the following reasons. First one is increased visibility. MSSPs, which is the managed security services provider, can offer enhanced visibility into network traffic, system logs, and security events. This allows you to have a much more comprehensive monitoring and detection of threats in your organization. Research by Gartner suggests that organizations that are using managed security services provider can achieve up to 50% greater visibility into their security posture. The second, reduced time to respond. With managed security services provider actively monitoring security events and providing alerts in real time back to your organization can significantly reduce the time it takes to respond to a security incident. A report by the Phenomenon Institute found that organizations with managed security service providers had a 33% faster response time to security incidents. Phenomenon Institute is a dedicated research institute that is focused on research and education that advances the responsible use of information and privacy management practices within a business. The third aspect, cost savings. While the upfront cost of engaging a managed security services provider may be significant, studies have shown that potential cost savings in the long run. For example, the same institute report revealed that organizations using a managed security services provider experienced an average cost savings of over 2.7 million over the 3 years due to faster incident response and reduced impact of security breaches. Now, the number is a bit arbitrary, but it'll vary depending on the investment and the value that the organization puts on their data. So it's different for every organization, but essentially what they've seen is that over the years, specifically around 3 to 5 years, they see a huge reduction in the overall TCO. The fourth aspect, expertise and resources. Managed security services provider offer a team of cybersecurity experts with specialized skills and resources. Often these individuals are very expensive to employ. As such, it's very useful for small, medium enterprises to engage the services of a managed security services provider. That way you can save the cost as well. Now, this all comes back into the cost savings as well. So instead of hiring an individual, you can then employ these MSSPs for fixed services that you pay over the years. Lastly, faster detection. Managed security services provider often provide continuous monitoring and advanced threat detection capabilities, leading to faster detection of cybersecurity events. According to the same report, organizations that leverage managed security services provider typically experience a 25% faster detection time for security breaches compared to those without one. Now, what are the best practices for the detection processes, right? You need to be able to strive to become aware of the breaches promptly and adhere to disclosure requirements when necessary. Your program should be capable to identify any unauthorized access to the data as soon as possible. Investing in a security information and event management tool, or a SIEM tool, is a good option. A SIEM solution is a security software designed to provide organizations with comprehensive visibility into their network activities, enabling swift responses to threats and minimizing disruptions to business operations. These tools and services analyze the network data in real time to detect and prevent security threats effectively. In summary, rapid detection of breaches or incidents is paramount to the survival and the success of your business, underscoring the importance of detect function within the cybersecurity framework, right? It's very important. Adhering to these standards, adopting those best practices, and implementing appropriate solution will enhance your cybersecurity posture and enable effective risk mitigation. The respond function, which is the fifth function of this NIST cybersecurity framework, involves promptly responding to cybersecurity incident as they arise. This entails establishing a clear incident response and escalation strategy to enable the organization or your organization to effectively address and recover from those cybersecurity incidents. Additionally, it enables a swift and effective remediation activity to minimize the potential harm in the event of an attack. This function forms the third layer in the protect, detect, and the respond triad, which is a foundational principle observed by most InfoSec frameworks. Initiating an incident response plan marks a crucial initial stride in embracing the respond function, guaranteeing adherence to the mandatory reporting prerequisites, securely encrypting and transmitting data tailored to the specific industry standards. By following this and developing a mitigation plan, it becomes a paramount objective for the organization. It essentially outlines the sequential measures that your team will execute in order to rectify and identify risk within your organization. The question that should be asked here is, what are the steps your team is willing to take to remediate a cybersecurity event in your organization, and how prepared you were for these situations? Some of the best practices that your organizations can employ for the response framework is to ensure the readiness of the response planning process by being able to execute during and after an incident. It is essential that you're able to mitigate and investigate the potential harm that is caused by these incidents in your organization. This is only possible if a plan has been drafted, formalized, and tested regularly in accordance to the changes in the organization. Now, these changes could be individuals within the organization, stakeholders, or even asset change within the organization. New assets introduce new vulnerabilities, new patches needs to be managed and maintained, so you need to be prepared for these variable changes in the organization. The second one is to establish protocols for managing communication during and after the event with all the relevant stakeholders, including law enforcement officers and also external parties, probably customers as and required. If you're a service provider and if your system's been compromised, you have the obligation to inform your customers of that compromise. This is called the public disclosure policy. Engaging law enforcement officers, that is as part of the communication strategy, generally is relevant for organizations that are closely aligned with and work with government agencies. Finally, implementing an analysis plan to ensure an effective response and support recovery activities, including forensic analysis and assessing the impact of the incident. This is where the previous framework, right, Respond, helps as well. By employing a SIEM tool that is able to generate logs, alert, and then store those logs in a secure location for a predetermined retention period, it's important that you're able to retrieve it so that you'll have all the relevant information when you need to do a forensic analysis. Now, the last function and the final function of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which emphasizes the activities that are aimed at restoring resilience and recovering from a cybersecurity incident, right? This is the recover function of framework. This involves implementing measures to resume normal operation and minimize the impact of the incident on the organization. The effectiveness of the organization's recovery efforts directly influences its ability to contain the impact of the cybersecurity event and also reduce potential damage. While this function complements protect, detect, and respond triad, it holds significant importance within the NIST framework. The level of damage resulting from a cybersecurity incident largely depends on the organization's proficiency in recovery. Therefore, prioritizing and effectively executing a recovery strategy is crucial for safeguarding organization assets and its reputation. Traditionally, organizations are generally focused on the recovery via backup or storage snapshot for this functionality. These recovery strategies worked well in the past. Ransomware and malware were predominantly file-based, and the attack methodology was via file-based that would compromise the organization. However, modern ransomware exists in the system's memory. They are harder to detect. They encrypt data in smaller chunks over a certain period of time. How do organizations adapt in this scenario? It's an important question, right? And this is where the recovery phase comes in. Some of the key strategies, I'm going to list out some of the key strategies that an organization can employ for the recovery phase. Now, the first one is to implement a robust recovery planning process and establish that system restoration process to effectively mitigate the consequences of the cybersecurity incident. It is important that the system restoration procedure includes the process of restoring the snapshot and the backup copy of the impacted system to an isolated recovery environment. Additionally, the tool should also allow the administrator to stage the environment in that isolated recovery environment, bring it up, and then let it run for a certain amount of time and continuously monitor and assess that system that's been recovered against known malicious file signatures. Additionally, this tool should also allow you to selectively enable and disable internal and external access of the system. This is important because in the modern ransomware environment, right, in ransomware stage, The effective system rarely shows any sign of bad behavior until it's able to establish a call home procedure. All this should be done with the consideration of the RTO and the RPO. Hence why all the previous framework are important as well in this process. The second option is to continuously learn and refine your recovery strategy. So you're continuously learning about the recovery strategy, you're continuously refining the security strategy based on existing industry standards, past cybersecurity incidents that may have or may have not occurred, and also aligning to your ongoing future strategy as well. Now, this is only possible by rigorously testing your recovery strategy, at minimum twice a year. I've seen organizations that treat this process as a mere compliance exercise. When a real incident occurs, it is as good as not having any plan in the first place. All it takes in the current day and age is one extended outage, and the reputation of your organization is entirely spoiled. Last but not least, developing a plan to coordinate both internal and external communication throughout the recovery process following a cybersecurity incident. This task would generally depend on the type of industry that you are in. Highly confidential organization would only reveal this to an internal panel. As such, this process is very fluid depending on the industry. And that's it, guys. We're technically done. Shipa, if you're around, I'm actually open for questions.
Thank you very much, Sentil, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. Now, before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that the session is in sync with EC Council CTIA program. EC Council CTIA maps to many roles in the industries like threat intelligence analyst, threat analysis and reporting, vulnerability management and threat intelligence engineer, etc. Anyone with a CTIA certification is eligible for 9,000 plus job vacancies globally with an average salary of $1,324. If you're interested to know more, please take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. Sentil, shall we start with the Q&A?
Yep, sure.
Okay. So our first question is, what pathway would you recommend one takes if one wants to get into cybersecurity governance, if one is changing career and still new to cybersecurity?
I think the best for that is training and also studying, right? So I think the best way to get into that is training, also review existing documents. So for example, look into the cybersecurity standards, such as this, the NIST Cybersecurity Standard, right? For example, if you've started way back and then you've not kept across it, the updated framework includes the additional functions. So just keeping up to date with the relevant trend, additional trainings, and most of the training organizations such as EC Council, they offer updated course materials, right? That is continuously updated. So I think training and self-learning is the best option. The other alternatives could be to socialize within your country. There's a security organization, or if there's a public forum that you can get associated with, participating there, LinkedIn and all that, those networking avenues will provide a good starting point as well. I'm doing that, so I think it's helped me so far. So I think it's a good strategy.
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. Our next question is NIST the backbone of cybersecurity?
Well, see, I won't go to that point of calling it as a backbone, but it is a framework that is used across the board, right? A lot of organizations use it. be it government, be it private sector. So it was initially developed by the US Department for their government agencies. But when they did that, they found that that framework could also be extended into private organizations. And a lot of organizations that you and I work with are either HQ'd or based in US, or they're based in countries that follow those standards as well. So it provides a good framework that you can follow, and it's a holistic framework as well. And by adding the final function, I think I'm not going to say it's a final function because it's a live document, right? By adding the governance function, if you look at the framework as well, it's in the center. So it's constantly a revolving strategy, and you always go back and forth, which was missing from the previous functionality, right? A lot of times you'd go in that cycle of identify, detect, recover, respond, and all that, but there was no govern function. How do you go to each of the function and ensure that it's being adhered to, it's being updated based on the current standards? So I won't go as far as telling that that is the final and fundamental backbone, but it is a strategy that is used predominantly across private and public sector across the globe.
Thank you, Sentil. Our next question is, what are the implications to consider for executing cloud IR?
So when you say cloud IR, is it incident recovery? So yeah, if you could clarify. So what was the question again, Shilpa? So
Sentil will take this offline. We can take this on Reddit. We'll have the clarification from the audience once. Okay, so our next question is, what are the tools used in cybersecurity for the beginners?
Cybersecurity for
beginners.
So
for the beginners.
So there's cybersecurity itself is huge, right? So as a beginner, you got to be specific. Are you going to be going into ethical hacking? Are you going to be going into threat monitoring? Are you going to be going into sort of like an operational analyst, or even if you're getting into the field of just advising organization? So it depends on the subject that you're going to get into, or on the tiers that you're going to get into. So if you would Google it, it's going to be out there. But getting into training, starting up, reading up general concepts and ideas about security would be helpful. But as I've said, cybersecurity itself, there's a lot of different tiers and different structures within it. So you got to be specific on which one you want to be part of that aligns to your career, and then you can go from there.
Thank you, Sentil. Our next question is, how AI impacting cybersecurity in today's era? Will it be ease or more threats are on the way to come?
It's a great question, right? And it's actually the current thing that's being discussed by all cybersecurity professionals. It's a double-edged sword, whereby you can think that, well, I'm going to use AI in my recovery tool. I'm going to use AI in my SIEM tool. I'm going to use AI in my threat detection tool. It's going to be able to detect based on previous signature, based on known database, and it's going to compare that with what I see from the live data, the big data that an organization has, and it's going to be able to provide that threat analysis way ahead. It's going to also allow you to integrate it with the SOAR tool and an orchestration tool that can automatically secure the data the moment it sees, or it thinks that it sees, an incident that's going on live in your organization. Now, flip it on the other side, the AI can also be used by bad actors within the organization, externally. So the bad actors could craft the AI functionality and send it across the organization to mask it so that it looks real, that it's able to adapt to the threats or the prevention tool or the detection tool that is used by your organization to detect it. So it could essentially mask itself and appear to be a legitimate program that's used by the organization. So that's why training comes into play. to answer that question, whether it's going to improve, yes, it will improve, but it's also going to be, you have to also look at the dark side of it. You also have to look at the other side of it. The ability for the ransomware or the malicious actors to advance themselves is also going to be way easier. So it's a double-edged sword, I'd say.
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. Our next question is, could you elaborate more on govern in the new NIST CSF 2.0?
Right. Sure. We can go back to the actual slide, right? So first of all, it's the latest framework, and the purpose of it is to ensure that the organization are aware of the management strategy, the identify what is the expectation of the organization, what are the strategy that they want to employ, what are the policies that they need to establish, and they also want to ensure that they effectively communicate these framework or these policies to essentially to the internal individuals within the organization. Right. So, for example, and the reason why this exists is that it forms as part of a as an outlayer, right? So that you are able to effectively achieve and implement all the other remaining functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recovery. So it aligns that to the organization's mission and also the objective. Because as I said earlier, right, each organization's exposure to assets exposure to cybersecurity is different. What could be critical for organization A could mean nothing for organization B. They might not even be in the same space. Now, so this is where govern comes in. It defines that strategy, it defines the objective, and then that objective and the strategy will help you to build and draft out the other remaining 5 functions. For example, what's governed for a telco industry is different for the say retail industry, for example. I hope that explains, but if you want, I could provide an extensive response back on the Reddit as well.
Thank you so much, Sentil. Our next question is, could you elaborate how for a malware attack the framework can be used?
Right, okay. So let's look at the entire cycle, right? So assuming that you've defined and employed a governance policy, now, when a ransomware event is detected in an organization, you'd go through the identify phase. You identify what assets are critical, what assets are not critical. If it's a non-critical asset, then you can go down and look at your second policy, right, which is protect. How do you want to protect it? How do you build framework to protect those assets? Then the third one is to detect. So once you've identified it, once you've determined which assets to protect, now you have a tool to detect the cybersecurity incident. Where it comes really relevant is at the response and the recovery state, because all the identify, the protect, and the detect framework is going to be defined. Now you know that the environment has been impacted. How do you respond effectively to the ransomware? How do you identify which system is compromised and which system is not? That's responding, right? And then once that's been identified, how do you isolate that? And how do you initiate the recovery process so that you don't reinfect your production systems? And you have a clear and defined policy saying that I'm going to recover all this impacted environment into an isolated recovery environment. I'm using those best practices. And in that isolated recovery environment, that's completely isolated from the production network. And you're going to be able to run a tool that's going to monitor the recovered system live as it runs. And then you run it for a certain amount of time, and you run it against the system that's going to compare and run scans against it based on known malicious signatures. And then that tool also should have the capability where you can selectively open internal and external connectivity for that recovered environment. Why this is important? It's important because a lot of new ransomware, they remain dormant until and when they are able to establish a call home function, because they're very tiny payload, right? They're going to go, yep, all done, I'm ready to go. Tell me what's the next command, because the attacker is actually live. He's actually communicating back to the ransomware. He's punching in the commands, or he's communicating with it, right? Or this could also be an AI-driven tool where it's going to go, yep, I'm already in the system. What's the second payload? What do I do now? The AI is going to tell, okay, download this payload into the system, start encrypting files that are known with these extensions, and so on and so forth. Now, that's why the isolated recovery environment becomes important. That's why the ability to open the network selectively becomes important as well. Now, based on that, if you've determined that all that checks and balances are done, and then everything's good, you can then initiate that recovery and then restore and rehydrate that environment back into your production system. So that's how the respond and the recover aspect of the framework becomes really important, and how well you have it organized in your organization becomes critical.
Thank you, Sentil. We'll take last question for the day. What is the meaning of RTO and RPO?
Okay, RTO is recovery time objective. RPO is recovery point objective, right? So for an example, say an environment's compromised, right? And you are an organization and you have a managed services provider, or you have your own IT system. Now, if that system is highly critical, what's important is, what's your recovery point objective? How far back can you go? Can you go back 1 hour? Can you go back 4 hours? Can you go back 12 hours or 8 hours? That will depend on your backup cycle. Now, recovery time objective is from the time that you initiate that recovery, say, okay, done. I have a copy that I can go back as far back as my last known good copy is 8 hours ago. Now I'm going to initiate the recovery of that environment from a backup copy that was 8 hours ago. Recovery time objective is how quickly can you recover the impacted system to a point where it's production again. Now that's how it differs.
Thank you, Sentil. I have got one more, we have too many of questions, but have got request for one question, so I'm just taking it. Could you please suggest some proactive techniques to identify active threats which could have affect organizations? Suppose an organizations don't have a SIEM tool or VA solutions or MSSPS. I mean some manual proactive threat decision techniques, if any.
Unfortunately, if you ask me personally, I'd say no. I'd say the best is, even if you're it's highly unlikely for any relatively sized organization not to have a SIEM tool. However, with that said, if you're a relatively new startup and you're a small organization, and you can't run that on your own because you don't have the expertise, the best advice I could give you is to engage a managed security services provider. You'll be surprised the cost of having these guys are relatively low, because your environment itself is so small, and your environment itself is less complex. Now they get more expensive based on the size of the organization and the complexity of the organization. If you're relatively small, I'm assuming that's the case, and that's why you don't have these tools. It's best to engage one of them so that they will be able to help you and take away that risk from you, right? Now, it becomes critical because then if you're going to get into and submit for tenders, or you're going to start working with public and private entities, having that engagement with an external provider is like a badge of honor for your organization as well. You could validly declare, look, I might be small, but look at my compliance policies that I've complying to. Look at my security policy and security protocols that I've enabled by engaging this external individual or external organization. That's my best advice. I think other than that, there are some tools out there that are free, but what happens with these tools is that they offer a minimal functionality for the free version, And then if you want to take advantage of those tighter and deeper integration, you got to pay for them. So you could either get into that. These are tools that are natively SaaS, so you don't need to manage and maintain them. You just configure your environment, ensure that it's a reputable tool, first of all, and then because you're going to be sharing your personal data. If you can't do that, then the managed security services provider is the next best strategy.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Sentil, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you, Sentil. Also, before we conclude the webinar, would you please like to give a small message to our audiences?
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate the time that you've spent. I've really enjoyed the questions as well. I'm happy to participate in these sessions, and I'm looking forward for future sessions as well. Thank you again, EC Council, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sentil.